Welcome to Fright Fix.
Bum,
How
bum,
are you doing,
bum.
Celia?
I'm good. I'm excited. We're doing a proper classic today. The
We're doing a proper film,
1976 Omen. The Omen.
The Omen.
The
Yeah.
Omen. Have
My
you seen it
laptop's
before?
called it. Sorry? Oh, have I
Have
seen
you
it
seen the
before?
Omen?
I'll tell you what, I have watched this movie like a trillion times,
No way.
but when I was like between the age of like 0 and 6.
Right. Prime age for being the kid in the Omen.
Oh man, my dad used to put this on. Like I grew up in one of those households where my dad did not understand age restrictions on movies
Right.
or adult content. So I grew up with movies like this and like 1980s action movies like with Arnold
Yeah.
Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone. So that was my kind of like Sesame Street when I was growing up. Bruce Lee movies, James Bond movies. So I mean watching this film again for this recording, like I'd not watched it in like about I don't know 30 years or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
And so like it was like watching it again for the first time, but as I was watching it, I remembered so many scenes, like so many
Mm.
moments.
It's nostalgic.
A little bit. There's some. I know I've said this to you like a trillion times before, but there's something about like movies from the 70s and 80s that just, I don't know. I just feel so much comfort watching them. Like
Yeah.
there's some kind of weird nostalgia about them that just makes me feel warm on the inside. So even horror movies like The Omen.
Yeah. It doesn't even matter if
Yeah.
you've seen it before. You're like, oh, takes me back.
It takes me back to a time when I wasn't even alive. So, yeah. What about you? You've seen this before?
I thought I did until I watched it and I was like, I definitely haven't seen this before.
Yeah.
I think I just know a lot about it, or maybe I saw the newer version of it and maybe thought it was this one. I don't know. But as I was
Mhm.
watching it, I was like, I don't think I've seen this before. But I'm glad we've gone back to one of the originals because I feel like we've done a lot of newer releases at the moment. I
Mm.
feel a bit jaded with horror. Like when
Yeah.
watching some of the stuff that just doesn't seem to pass mustard, and you're like, oh, we kind of need to do a few more of the classics. So I'm glad you picked this one.
I'm really glad we did this film. Yeah, because I wanted to just see something older. Like, yeah, I kind of got tired of seeing kind of modern stuff, and yeah, there's something like watching these kind of older films. It's like comfort food for me.
Yeah.
So I was quite grateful that you agreed to this. So, what did you think of The Omen?
Well, I mean, for starters, I have that weird nostalgia, even though I was 20 years away from being alive at this point.
You were
Uh,
almost exactly
uh,
20 years.
yeah, literally. So this isn't my era, but when I was like, snuggled down watching this, it felt like when you're watching a horror movie for the first time and you have that little like, ooh, what's it going to be like feeling?
Yeah, yeah.
And I think there's a few things about old films, especially 1970s films, that make them feel so rich. And one of
Mm.
them is the music. They have a full, like, orchestral score throughout the whole film. And it really brings an atmosphere that you don't get in films today. I sound like such a hipster. You just don't get that sound quality these days. But, you have and some of the shots are very long and slow, and you wouldn't get that in a film today because they've got to keep going on to the next thing. And
Mm.
it maybe does feel like the music's a bit too over the top, or the camera shots are too long. But you kind of have to take it with the time and say, okay, you're watching something from a different period. We're also used to everything going really, really fast and it being, super sleek and super well done. And it just wasn't the case back then. And I kind of like that. It feels a bit more authentic.
Yeah, yeah, like the music, it's quite interesting that you pointed that out because the guy who composed it, Jerry Goldsmith, he's like an OG gangster m movie and TV composer. Like he's done some
Ah,
amazing soundtrack. It's like the equivalent of getting so back then in the 70s, this getting Jerry Goldsmith to score your horror movie is like imagine us making a low budget horror movie and getting John Williams to score it. Like
yeah. Or Hans
it's
Zimmer. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I suppose Hans. Yeah, imagine. Yeah, getting someone like Hans Zimmer to like Jerry Goldsmith is like a legend, and I mean, I think you may have read up on it or something, but like this, like he scored like a trillion films in his career, like a
Yeah.
lot of really memorable ones, and like I think this was the only movie he won an Oscar for in
Really?
regards to soundtrack. Yeah, yeah. I read something about like I think he'd been nominated so many times, and I think I think it might be the 77 Oscars or the 76 Oscar. It might be 70. Yeah, like he didn't want to go because he'd been
Mm.
disappointed so many times, and he'd been nominated that year. And I think the director told him, no, definitely you'll go. You're going to win this year. And then
Yeah, and he
it was the
did.
only time he ever won. Yeah.
Wow.
And
I mean, it
yeah,
definitely is like a character in itself in this film, I think, the music. And not
definitely.
something it's not necessarily creepy music. I mean, there's some sound effects that are quite creepy, but the general music is just more about the atmosphere and building up a bit of tension without it being too obviously horror-y, which is
Yeah,
quite interesting.
I mean, there's a lot of moments where there's like a full-on kind of choir, like
Yeah, yeah,
belting it out and whatnot.
it's crazy, and that's what I mean by the film feels rich because of that sort of thing where it's clearly, and now that I know that it's like a really famous composer, you can clearly hear it. It's a big part of this film. On
Mm,
the other hand, I don't know why I'm so caught up in the sound. I don't know if you had this problem, but I found the sound levels in this film really weird. I was
yeah,
watching it on a laptop and I kept having to turn it up and turn it down and turn it up and turn it down because like some scenes I could barely hear, and then other scenes, like the dogs barking, I literally couldn't listen to it. I was like, this is
it's
so
a lot.
grating.
It was
And
a
it's
lot. Yeah,
and then when
yeah.
the screams are like way off, like so loud compared to everything else.
Yeah, no, I'm actually quite surprised you mentioned that because I felt the exact same way. And if how do I even approach this? I mean, I have nothing to back this up or no evidence or no, I don't have any musical experience or sound experience, but there's something about older films. So when I was growing up, when I used to watch this stuff on video or TV, the sound was always in mono. Like it was
Yeah,
always one speaker on the corner of your TV that would pump out all this sound, and everything sounded fine. Like it sounded like the crap quality sound matched the crap quality image on your TV.
yeah,
Like it was just, But these days, like a lot of these movies, they weren't even recorded in stereo. Like
yeah,
I don't think stereo sound even came out with movies until like some point in the 80s. Maybe even I mean, I'm pretty sure it's some point in the 80s when movies started being shot in stereo sound. So I think there's been some kind of sound remastering or remixing
mm,
going on with this because there were so many bits where the sound levels just did not sound right. And I think sometimes with these older movies, the sound should just be left like they shouldn't try to artificially stereoify it or
yeah,
try to make it into surround sound because it just doesn't match.
yeah,
It doesn't make sense, and that I whilst I was watching the film, it was rubbing me up the wrong way a little bit.
yeah.
Like I
It's
just wanted to watch my old video, like old VHS copy of it. That's what I wanted to watch.
It would be interesting to watch VHS copy and see what the difference is, because I think you're right. I would rather it have been slightly quieter at some points
Hmm.
rather than trying to like but everything else be relatively okay, rather than it going up and down so much that
Yeah, it
like
wasn't a good
yeah.
mix. Yeah, I
But
agree.
I can't believe I had so much to say about the sound. But generally, so the Omen is like the classic child of Satan story that I can't remember the other films that we've seen that are basically based on this, but we've seen quite a few. And I think because we've seen so many horror films now, every single one that we do watch of the originals will be like, oh, so that's what all of the other films were based on. Because this is the
Yeah,
Antichrist film, basically, of a couple whose son dies in childbirth or dies in childbirth, and a priest says to the father, well, we have a child whose mother died, would you like this child instead, and just don't tell your wife, which is very messed up, and they kind of gloss over that.
yeah,
I like one of the first things I said in my notes was like, is this the good guy? Like the dad is the good guy in this film, and he's the one that lied to his wife and pretended his child didn't die and just adopted a different son without telling anyone.
yeah. There's a lot of that in this film. A lot of this kind
Yeah.
of weird kind of well, I suppose it's of that time, really, isn't it? I don't know why the word gaslighting kept coming to my mind,
Yeah, it
but
is. It 100%
yeah.
is.
Yeah, and I think the scene where it kind of hits its kind of crescendo for me in terms of that gaslighting is, when the mum's at home and the kid's just like making loads of noises and the mum's like, get rid of him, I don't want any more
Yeah.
kids or whatever, that noise, it's getting annoying. And then the dad who's probably spent a whole day at work comes in for 2 seconds and goes, it's okay, there's nothing wrong with the sound. He's just
Yeah.
playing. Hey son, how are you doing, son?
Ugh.
And it's like he was only there for
Yeah.
2 minutes and she's had to endure like an entire day of that kid's nonsense.
Yeah.
And I feel like that kind of summed up the dynamic or the
The gaslighty, but I mean, it
yeah.
is definitely any film that we watch now, it's really hard to not look at it through a lens of like how we feel today.
Mm,
And it's not an overly
yeah.
sexist or misogynistic film at all. There's
No.
just elements of it like that, and like the fact that he just doesn't tell her that her child's dead. And there's another bit where she wants to have an abortion, and he's
Mm,
basically just like, no. And it's
no.
like,
Yeah.
oh, oh, we don't like
Yeah.
you. We don't like the way that you think. But he's still, the hero of the story, that you just almost have to be like, okay, it's of its time, that it wouldn't be the same today, but like that's the kind of character it is.
Yeah.
And yeah, so the story follows the child growing up and the parents kind of in their own different ways realizing that something's not right. The mother realizes it a bit earlier than the father. And yeah, this nanny comes out of nowhere and decides to take care of the child after that last nanny hung herself. And then the father kind of goes on this like detective mission with this photographer to try and figure out what is wrong with his son, or like
Yeah.
what's going on. And it ends up, yeah, we find out that he's, spoiler alert, the Antichrist. And yeah, he has to
Yeah.
kill him.
Yeah, yeah. I think the director's original intentions, I'd read that he wanted to keep it a bit more ambiguous or a bit vague as to whether he was the Antichrist or not.
Well, that didn't translate.
Yeah, I think the studio exec or the whoever the guy at the top was had said no, it needs to be obvious.
Yeah.
Like I think the original intentions were to leave the audience guessing, but then I think the studio had vetoed that.
And I do get that, because the ending, so it ends with almost on a cliffhanger, because the father's trying to kill the son, knowing that he's the Antichrist, and then it kind of fades out after this scuffle happens, and then you see these caskets, and you're like, "Ooh, which one died?" And it
Yeah,
turned out
yeah,
that the father dies, and then the son like is now the president's son, which is obviously like, oh my god, the Antichrist has all this power, and he like smiles at the camera, and you're like,
yeah,
"Ugh, he's gonna take over the world." That wouldn't have worked if it was ambiguous whether he was the Antichrist or not. Like, it kind of works because we absolutely know that he is at that point,
yeah,
and it hits
yeah.
harder. But this is unintentionally the third or fourth film in a row that is based around a creepy kid.
Oh my gosh, after all that talk about
Not
we
wanting
need to
to.
try something different and whatnot. We just
Well, how did this compare in your mind to the other creepy kids that we've had in The Babadook and Run Rabbit Run and countless others?
it's strange because even though the story revolves around this kid who's the Antichrist, like I didn't feel like the kid was really involved that much in
Yeah,
the movie. And yeah, like at no point did like the I don't know, like it felt like it was more about the dad, Gregory
100%.
Peck's character, and it was we were kind of following him around and people trying to warn him that, oh, you have to repent or whatever, drink the blood of Christ and whatnot, accept him as your savior and whatnot. Oh, your wife's gonna die. It was well, I suppose rightfully so. It probably revolved around him because he was like the big name star attached to this movie. I
Mm,
mean, Gregory Peck had been acting since like the 30s or something. So
yeah.
it I the one character I found so hilarious was the priest who was chasing him around saying
Yes.
like, oh no, your wife's in danger, or you need to
Yeah.
repent. Like,
Everything you just said, like, drink the blood of Christ.
yeah, that guy actually played Doctor Who. He was a Doctor Who.
Was he?
Yeah, he was like the second or third Doctor Who.
No
Yeah, like
way.
yeah, yeah, yeah. His you're a Harry Potter fan, right?
I am.
Yeah. So there's that Dursley kid.
Yeah. Which,
Dursley?
yeah, Dudley.
Oh, yeah. He's his grandchild.
No way.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh
I
my
think it's his
God.
grandchild. Yeah, like
Dudley
his
Dursley is a Nepo baby. I did not think that was going to be. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah. It's yeah. I found that guy, that priest, quite, or the whatever he was, like to be so hilarious. Because if he just came to Gregory Peck's character, like just normally sat him down and said, "Hey, man, I got to talk to you about something."
yes.
That some shit's happened. This is
Yeah.
what happened. If he just talked to him, but instead his character literally bursts in on him, repent, accept the
Yeah.
Lord as your savior. Your wife's gonna die, or I don't know. Just like there was so everything was so dramatic and so kind of like insane, and like no, it's like he was doing everything to scare Gregory Peck off and like put him off him. So just
I
I don't know.
100%
Yeah,
agree. I had that in my notes. I was like, there was also a point where Gregory Peck's character says to him, "Just tell me what you want."
yeah,
And he stops, and that's the point where he'd be like, "Oh, by the way, your son is the Antichrist, and here's the evidence for it." And here's obviously there wouldn't be a film if that
yeah,
happened,
yeah,
but it's so like farcical how far away from like, how ambiguous he is. It's not even like that he gets anything from that conversation other than this guy is crazy. He just
yeah,
keeps saying like, "Drink the blood of Christ, drink the blood of Christ," and
yeah,
like
yeah,
locks the door so that they get, it makes it seem really, really hostile from the beginning. I found
yeah,
that scene like equally annoying and funny at the same time because I was like,
yeah.
seriously, he couldn't have he couldn't have just come in there and thought, right, I'm just gonna be honest with you. You've got some serious issues. I'm here to help. And also I like his, that was his role, was basically just to shake things up and then he gets killed. That was it. He did his job.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And also that after the first nanny kind of hangs herself. Oh my gosh, that scene. Like that was I thought it was actually so that first nanny, she like throws herself off of a building during a kid's party.
And she's like,
Okay.
watch me, like look at me
Yeah,
to the kid.
yeah, she's like, Damien, I love you. Look at me,
Yeah,
Damien. Look at yeah. And then all the kids turn around and she literally just throws herself off a building with a noose around her neck and
yeah,
hangs herself. And also she smashes through one of the windows of the
yeah,
house. Like, I love how they didn't really cut away. Like they kind of showed, like they didn't hide anything. Like the more or less the
yeah.
whole process of her hanging herself was shown. And I think that was, with all the deaths in this film, literally everything was
Yeah,
shown.
it was all there.
There was nothing like left to like your imagination. It was all kind of like so that the decapitation with the glass, that spike that goes through the man's neck or whatever, through the priest's neck or something.
Yeah.
What other deaths were there? Like when the mum falls off of the out of the building or gets pushed out of the
Yeah, off the
building.
balcony. Oh, and then out of the
Yeah.
building. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, both of those. Yeah, like there was nothing that was left to imagination. Like they literally showed everything.
Everything. And that first one, so it was the first hint that this film was a horror film, was when she jumps out, because it goes from like this kid's birthday party, Damien's birthday party, to her hanging herself. And it's such a like shock.
Mm.
I was shocked because I didn't know that was going to happen. Obviously, I've never seen this
Yeah,
before. And it was so like real for a
yeah,
second. It was like, whoa,
yeah,
this is insane. I actually like my mouth opened. I was like, oh,
yeah,
what?
yeah, yeah.
I have to admit that's probably the only time in this film, and this is a negative that I have of this film, is that was
Mm.
the only time in the film that I really genuinely felt like this was a horror film.
Yeah,
Like a
yeah,
lot,
yeah.
there wasn't that much else that I was like, this is really scary. There's like a few creepy bits, but it wasn't outright scary or even like, and I do like want to preface it with like, I know that they can't be overly creepy because they couldn't use CGI. Like they have to just use what they have. It's not going to be like a film that we have today, but still, it wasn't as creepy as it wasn't as scary as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, yeah. By today's standards, for sure. Like, yeah, there weren't any real jump scares or anything. Like, everything was very manageable, I think.
Yeah.
Like, it felt more like a thriller than a kind of a horror.
Yeah, and it's more of just like the investigation, just like you put it, which I think is a really good point. It's like it's more about the dad trying to find out about the son, more about than the son himself and what he's doing. Because like he doesn't play a very active role. Like in most scenes, he's just a child. Like he's not actually that creepy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can totally imagine like back in the 70s this being like a scary film. I
Yeah.
can but so I can put like when you can put yourself or try to put yourselves in the shoes of an audience member back then. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. By today's standards, like it's not really a jump scare movie or a horror
Yeah.
movie.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
it is hard when you're watching scenes like the decapitation of the photographer, where he has that papier-mâché head that comes
Yeah.
flying off. There's
Yeah.
like it's so bad, but and it makes it funny today because you're like, that is crazy that
Yeah.
worked. But like I do get it. And the same with the mum falling off the balcony to start like the first time. It's just so fake. And
Yeah.
she falls in slow motion, but then she hits the floor in slow motion, like she fell in slow motion. Like
Yeah.
she lands and she kind of just flops onto the floor on her side,
Yeah.
and a little bit of blood comes out of her mouth. And I'm like, this is so unrealistic. But again, take it with a grain of salt.
And the blood that pulls out of her mouth is like this bright
Bright
red
red.
paint or something.
They
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
are in the old films like this. Like they never get blood right. And I don't know whether it's like the color correction of it or what. Oh, and also it's the consistency. It's like super watery and
Mhm.
red all the time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, totally see where you're coming from. Yeah. I found that scene with so when that first nanny dies and then I think a few scenes after a second nanny enters
Yeah.
the picture and she's like none of the parents both think, oh, did you order that nanny? No, I thought you did. And then that nanny
Yeah.
is just like, oh yeah, the agency just sent another nanny and we just want to take care of you and blah blah. Like there was no kind of I thought like what would I do in that situation? Like I think I like to think I would be very cautious about who's been sent and like
Yeah,
especially
you'd
if
vet
they're gonna
them.
yeah, or get to know them first and see if they're even the right fit. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think for me, what kind of turned was when the next morning or whatever, the mum's like, "Okay, get Damien ready for church. We're going to church." And that nanny's like, "Oh, it's probably not a good idea. Damien wouldn't, like to go to church and blah blah." Blah. And that's
Yeah.
when I thought, okay, yeah, she's
She's in on
she's
it.
she's in on it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. She's a plant and whatnot.
Yeah, because she
But
turns out to
yeah.
be, what is she? She's like a protector of the Antichrist or something like
Some
that.
yeah some kind of yeah some yeah has some role in ensuring his survival or something, yeah. But there's a part of me that was just thinking like it would have been good if it was just a bit more vaguer like with her
Mm.
character because she was like you could tell
And
she's a
she
villain.
creepy looking. And I don't know, this isn't part of it, but she had way too many teeth. Like I don't know what it was, but she had so many teeth in her mouth and it really
Okay.
freaked me out. And
I'll
it wasn't
go
like they
back
were
and
big
look,
or
yeah,
anything. She just had loads of them. It looked like she had like four extra teeth
like a
on the top.
shark or something.
Yeah, and I was like, but anyway, yeah, she was very obviously not right.
Yeah, yeah, I
Whereas
think
that's why the first death was so creepy because she was just a lovely nanny, and then suddenly she just
normal, yeah.
switches, and I think that's something that I would have liked to see more in this film because we don't really understand why she did that, or you could just assume, oh, she did it because like the Antichrist has this power over people, but it doesn't really follow through. Like the deaths don't really match up, or you don't really see how the Antichrist did those things other than the nanny, because she directly says, like, Damien, look at me. So it's obviously trying to get his attention. But the other deaths, well, yeah, are kind of not to do with him. And it's like, oh, it would have been cool if it was like all of these people get obsessed with the Antichrist and then kill themselves or something.
Yeah, yeah, that's where there's like kind of mixed messaging in the film because if the intention was to have the whole film quite vague, as in you don't quite know because there's nothing supernatural in the film.
No.
Like there's no monsters or demons or ghosts or anything. Like it's all very grounded in reality. And like if the mission was to make a very kind of vague movie where it keeps the viewer guessing, like you're never quite sure if it is Damien or if it's just a series of freak accidents. But then on the other side, like there's they make it obvious with the dog. They make it obvious with the nanny who's obviously just evil. Like it feels like there's two movies tugging at each other,
Mm,
like in two different directions. I personally probably would have preferred if the entire thing was a bit more vague and a bit more kind of
yeah.
you could have two interpretations of it, where some people think, no, he's definitely the Antichrist, and some people think, no, 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 it's just a bunch of accidents. Because at the end, when Gregory Peck takes Damien to the church, and there's this one bit in that scene, because I wanted him just to kill Damien by that point, but
Mm,
then there's one bit where Damien's like crying and he says, "Daddy, please, Daddy, what you do?"
yeah.
And it was at that bit where I was like thinking, this would have been like a brilliant like twist on the story where you think, oh man, it's Gregory Peck
Oh,
imagining
that's
all of
such a good
this,
point.
like but yeah, I don't know. That's kind of the movie I probably would have preferred it to be, and just
Yeah, that is a really good point actually, because he has 666 in his hair. Like it's obvious that it's him. I mean, there are other things that
yeah,
make it so obvious, but you're right. It's like it's kind of what Rose Rosemary's Baby did so well, which was
Yeah.
second guessing whether she was going mad or not. And then obviously
Yes.
we find out at the end that she wasn't going mad.
Yeah.
They are
Yeah.
actually Satanists. But for a long time, you're like, I'm not really sure. But in this, you're like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
kill the kid.
Yeah,
The
I
greater
would have
good.
preferred that approach. I would have
Yeah.
much preferred that kind of way it keeps the audience guessing. Then maybe right at the very end, like even at the end when it shows Damien with, where we zoom in on him at the funeral and then he smiles. There's
Yeah.
a little part of me that wishes he didn't smile, and then it
Yeah.
just the camera just lingered, and then it just faded to black. Like
And then you're
we,
second guessing, like, is he the Antichrist? Is
yeah,
this it?
because I bet even with that, just his face, but some people would be like, he's got a little smile, and other people be like, well, he
Yeah.
wasn't smiling at all. Like, what is it? Like,
Yeah, you're so
it's
right. Because like the tantrum before he goes into the church, it could have just been a toddler tantrum not wanting to go
could have just
to a
been, yeah.
church, but it kind of makes it obvious that it's because he doesn't like to go into like a holy place.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It felt like there were two different. I mean, and that probably just ties in with the what I've read about the story, where the director wanted it to be vaguer, but the studio
Yeah.
wanted it to be a bit more obvious. So it just felt like
It
maybe there were
comes
two.
through. Yeah.
Yeah. I bet they were just last minute reshoots where they had probably tweaked some of the scenes, and
Mm.
I mean, I'm guessing, I don't know, but yeah,
I would like, one of the things that I did like about Damien as a character was how he wasn't overacted. Like he is a main character, but like you say, he kind of isn't. He's kind of a periphery as well. And he's just a
yeah,
kind of creepy looking kid,
yeah,
but
yeah.
he doesn't do anything that's outwardly creepy at all through the
No,
film.
no. I mean, he does annoying
Yeah, he's
things that
annoying
children
stuff.
do. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
but nothing
nothing
that makes you
evil
think
or
like apart from when he rides his tricycle into the mum and she falls off the balcony. That's the only bit where it's like he's an actual threat because he like gets his little tricycle and like rides up to her.
yeah, that scene, it's an interesting one because I can totally imagine a child doing something stupid like that just unintentionally. But
Yeah.
the bit you see is he's just riding around in circles in his little room like a idiot kid. But then that nanny
Opens the
opens the
door.
door and guides him out or whatever, and and so it's I mean, maybe if they re-recorded that scene where she was just, I don't know, maybe the nanny was just clearing up and she just needed to open the door for a second, and Damien just accidentally went out, and then
Yeah.
made it a bit made it a bit more vague like that. And it just reminds me of like the film feels like it might have been like the origin for like the Final Destination movies a little bit. You know
It
how,
does. Yeah, yeah.
but the thing with the Final Destination movies is everything is, they never show death. Everything's meant to
Yeah.
be an accident or a freak accident. Whereas this movie doesn't quite have that kind of freak accident nature about it.
Well,
Like,
it kind of does. Apart from the nanny hanging herself, the mum falls out of a window when she's like got a t-shirt over her head or something, when she's trying to get dressed. So you could say like, oh, she just fell backwards. If you didn't see the scene where she's like, "What are you doing here?"
yeah,
Like
but that's the thing
that could be, yeah, you do see
yeah,
her. But
yeah.
then the priest getting impaled, that's lightning that hits the top of the church, isn't it?
Yeah, because
So that could be one.
he's walking around and suddenly you get this kind of like gale force wind, and suddenly lightning starts striking the grass around him or the whatever, and then
Yeah.
he tries to get to the church, but before he gets to the church, that's when that
He
spire
gets
or whatever comes
impaled.
in.
And then obviously my favorite death, which is the photographer, gets
Oh,
like
yeah,
a piece of glass comes off the back of a truck and it hits him in the head. And I think what's really funny about that scene is Gregory Peck has just had a massive hissy fit. And he's
yeah,
like, he has this scene where he's like, "I'm not going to kill my child." And he throws the knives that he's supposed to use like away from him. He has a proper tantrum about it. And then the photographer goes and gets them. And as he's bending down to pick them up, that's when his head gets chopped off. And there's just
yeah.
something so comical about that scene, which they obviously didn't mean to do. But it was the mixture of having a tantrum and the very obviously puppet head that comes off the photographer, that
Yeah.
it could have been a bit of a satire at that point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny because the scene before that, Gregory Peck's telling the photographer, "I want Damien to die. He has to die. I want to kill him, whatever." And then literally in the next scene, once he gets given those knives or whatever, he's like, "I can't kill him."
Yeah, it's too
It's
real
kind of
now. Yeah. One of the things I did actually really like about this film was the and again, we see it in a lot of films. It was in most of the Conjuring or one of them, I always get them confused, was the photographer finding signs in his photography that the
Yeah.
deaths were going to happen. So I can't remember what the nanny's was. Oh yeah, she had something coming off. She had a line coming off the back of her head,
Mm.
which ended up being the noose rope that comes off the back of her head. The priest gets impaled from his left side or right side,
Yeah.
and there's a streak across the photograph, which is of that. And then he takes a photo of himself and his head, there's like a
Yeah.
line across his head. I think, like, taking into account this probably the first time that that's ever happened in cinema, that was really cool, because I'm like, oh, that's a kind of origin of you look back at photos and realize that it told you something about people's deaths. I thought that was really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, there's loads of horror films, like modern horror films that we've watched where the structure tends to be the first part of the movie is where all the creepy stuff happens.
Mm.
And then the next part of the movie is where they'll meet some kind of expert, and
Yeah.
it's the expert will explain everything to them, and then the last part is when they're gonna go take them down or whatever.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. And that I've always said, like, I love a good investigation. Like, I
oh
love
yeah,
them trying
yeah,
to figure it out.
it
And
is fun,
this
yeah,
has all of this. Like, they go to Italy and they figure out where this orphan came from and who his mother was, and they find the graves, and then these dogs try and chase them off. And, they go through proper, and they end up in this kind of like Indiana Jones type, like, ruins to get the sort of the I was gonna say stabby things. I mean daggers to
Oh,
kill him.
the stabby
The
things, yeah.
stabbies. And like, so I enjoy those kind of films. I mean, it like you say, it becomes much more of a thriller than it does a horror. I think the second half of the film, once they've done all the kind of creepy-ish build up, it kind of then goes off in a different direction, which
Yeah,
would be one of the criticisms I have of this film, is like, even though it's really interesting that they are doing this, it stops being a horror film at that point, and it's just quite an interesting thing to watch. But it would have been nice if it maybe cut back to a few scenes with Damien doing other things, and like the tension building, because nothing apart from the mother dying, like, he doesn't become worse, or nothing really changes with him. So, like, I don't know, it would have built up the tension, I think, a little bit, if as he
yeah.
was off investigating, he realized he absolutely needed to kill this kid because, like, all this other stuff has been going on. Like,
Mm.
maybe something bigger than just inside their family, like, I don't know, some
Yeah,
government thing happens and they realize that there's a connection or something like that, that's like, oh, there's a bit of
yeah.
a build up now.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'd be eager to see the 2006 version and see how different it is, or if it is even different,
Yeah.
to see if they fix some of these issues or if they change them in any way. Or
I'd be really worried that they try and fix it, but then they overdo it on the bits that are really good about this film. Like we were saying, it's really realistic. It feels like there's no overacting.
Hmm.
It has these elements of it, and I'd worry that any newer version of this film, even though they might finesse the story a little bit,
Yeah,
might lose
yeah.
some of the original elements that make this film quite iconic.
Yeah, yeah. What did you think the significance of those dogs were? Because I couldn't quite figure out, like, is there some kind of like mythology related to Rottweilers or something? Like, is
I'm
there?
not sure if it's what Riley specifically, but there are like the Hounds of Hell, which are
Hmm.
like I think they signify the end of, like, as part of the apocalypse.
Oh,
So
okay.
I think that's what I thought. I thought they were like the Hounds of Hell. But I also think that it's just quite creepy to have like a vicious dog like a Rottweiler, like, guarding you or like being attracted to you as a child. It's like,
Yeah.
it's not a rabbit like Run Rabbit Run, which wasn't scary at all. Like,
No,
it's a
no.
rabbit. But this is like a really scary dog that's like overly protective of this child. It's kind of creepy. It's really weird to have that happen to you and be like attract that kind of animal. But I do think it does have significance in the, like, the end of days mythology of,
Yeah.
like, you have like the four horsemen of the apocalypse, you have like Hounds of Hell, you have like all different types of things that happen which signify the end of the world, and I think that's part of it.
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. It was about your severed head thing. I read this fact, or I don't know if it is a fact or not, but so the guy who plays that photographer, his name's David Warner in real life, and apparently he kept the severed head for years until he had his first divorce when his ex-wife obtained custody of it.
That is so funny. Imagine fighting over custody of a severed head. Your severed head.
Yeah, yeah.
His, so the photographer is the only actor I recognized I
Oh,
recognized,
really?
yeah. So and
I
the reason I
recognize everything.
recognized him was he is the old man nowadays in so many BBC things. He's in Midsummer Murders, and that's how I recognized him. He's in like old like detective things, and he always plays like the grouchy old gameskeeper or something like that. And I was like, is that him? And I looked it up and I was like, it is him. He's just
Oh,
in
I
like
didn't
really
recognize
random
him.
things.
Yeah, he died a couple of years ago.
Oh, really?
Like 2 years ago. Yeah.
He has been pretty old for quite a long time.
I found this really weird about all the cast of literally everybody involved in the making of this movie, other than Damien, is dead. Like none of them are still alive. Like all the actors in this film are gone. Every single one of them.
Don't you think it's because they were quite old?
Yeah, yeah, true. Yeah, yeah. It's just weird. It's like I remember a time when I was younger when the 70s were only like less than 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's so weird, like how now the 70s are like 50 years ago or whatever.
Yeah, I was
It's
going to
it's
say,
just
if somebody was born in 74, they'd be 50 now. That's crazy.
weird.
Yeah. I mean, I've never seen the kid in anything else. I don't know if he ever did any other stuff. But I mean, he wasn't really acting in it, I suppose. He was just kind of there.
I read this news article. I mean, I don't think he has done much acting after this film, but he's I think he makes a cameo in the 2006 version. But I read this
Ah,
news article that he very recently had a road rage incident where he beat up two other drivers or
no
something, and he got
way.
arrested for it or something.
Oh my God, the
Yeah,
devil's coming out.
yeah.
It's finally showing its face. Another thing about this film that I thought was so of its time was their outfits. Like the
Oh,
bell-bottom trousers and like
there we
these
go.
and the haircuts. They were the male haircuts, especially the photographer had the most ridiculous haircut.
Yeah, yeah,
It's just like I know fashions come and go and we do have like cyclical fashion,
yeah,
but
yeah.
just shoot me if I'm ever wearing that kind of two-piece brown bell-bottom suit that they put Damien in when he goes to the zoo. It's crazy.
You're gonna be
But
doing that to your kid one day, just
yeah.
as a reference. Yeah.
But so would you recommend people watch this film, whether they're because we usually say like if you're a horror fan, watch it, and if you're not, would you recommend this to a horror fan?
Firstly, yeah, if you're a horror fan, I think this is like foundational viewing. I think it's definitely worth watching just so you can kind of get an understanding of the history of horror movies. And you'll, as you mentioned earlier, like there's a lot of tropes and gimmicks that you probably recognize or you've probably seen in horror movies that may have even originated from this film or spun out from this
Hmm.
film. Yeah. What about yourself?
I would totally agree. I think I for some reason in my head I built this up as being really scary before I
Mm,
started. Like I was a little bit like, ooh, I'm gonna
yeah.
get freaked out. And maybe it's because I built it up so much that I was maybe disappointed is too harsh of a word, but I was like, oh, it wasn't that scary actually. It wasn't about that. But obviously everything you say is why I'd recommend it is that it is one of the staples of horror films. But part of me was like, oh, I thought this was going to be one of the ones that stick with me because it really freaks me out, but it didn't really. So, it's like it's two sides of the film. But I think the fact that we've had so much to say about this film is a really good sign because it's like there's a lot of interesting elements to this film that whether or not it's like the scariest film, it's really interesting.
Yeah, yeah, I really enjoyed it. I had a good time with it. I mean, yeah, there are some bits where it kind of my brain switched off a little bit, but for the most part, on the whole, I had a good time with it. And I actually want to watch the sequels because there's like three of them or something, and then there's the remake, and I think later on this year there's a prequel due to come out.
Yeah, because we were looking at it and it was just a coincidence that you'd said, should we do the Omen? And then we looked up new films coming out. And it's like, oh, it's like the Omen original or like the Omen something.
Yeah, yeah. So there's meant to be like so Omen 1, 2, and 3, then there's a remake, and then there's a TV movie called Omen Awakenings or something, and then there's another TV series called like Omen Damien, and there's a couple of them.
Wow.
There's a few spin-offs and whatnot. I've not
What?
seen any of them other than this movie. So
Yeah, maybe we should go for the trio and see what
if
happens. But I
if
don't, I
they're
don't
all
know
on
how much.
Disney Plus,
Are they actually? Okay,
they're
well
all
then maybe
there,
we
yeah,
should.
yeah.
And end it with the new one. I mean, how much more is there to say? Well, I guess he then joins, he's the president's son. So I suppose that could be a film in itself. Or is he an adult and he's like now the devil? I don't know.
Yeah, I think he's just going to work his way up to the White House. Or...
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
and turns out to be a orange-faced, blonde-haired certain someone in the end. Who knows? I wouldn't
There's
be
this
surprised.
there's this thing I got to read it to you, and I don't know how I have no idea how true this is or not, but it kind of just fascinated me. So, all right. So forgive me, my reading skills aren't that great, but I'll do my best. So, all right. So the film seemed to fall victim to a sinister curse. Have you heard of this?
No.
Star Gregory Peck and screenwriter David Seltzer took separate planes to the UK, yet both planes were struck by lightning. While producer Harvey Bernhard was in Rome, lightning just missed him. The Rottweilers hired for the film attacked their trainers. A hotel at which director Richard Donner stayed at got bombed by the IRA. He was also struck by a car. And then after Gregory Peck cancelled another flight to Israel, the plane he would have chartered crashed, killing all on board. On day one of the shoot, several principal members of the crew survived a head-on car crash. The jinx appeared to persist well into post-production when special effects artist John Richardson was injured and his girlfriend was beheaded in an accident on the set of A Bridge Too Far.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
That's
crazy, huh?
insane. Like when you started that, I was like, okay, there's gonna be like three examples.
Yeah.
It just keeps going.
Yeah.
That is crazy. I mean, the only one that I wouldn't add in there, like I wouldn't think is like that crazy, is the Rottweilers
Attacking their owners.
like attack it. I'm like, well, they are animals, like you don't know, but being beheaded, that's a coincidence and a half. Lightning
Yeah.
striking, being on a plane, supposed to be on a plane that crashes.
How weird is that? That's
Well,
just crazy,
maybe we
man.
shouldn't speak ill of this film. Maybe we should just be like, it's really great, and all the scenes look super realistic, and it's a staple. Well, we
I,
are
I
being
think
quite positive.
I think it's things like this, like whenever you hear about old-timey horror movies that have a cursed production, kind of elevates them into
Yes,
a kind of the next level of
the
like
law.
yeah, like
Yeah,
you hear about like stories about The Exorcist and oh so and so who was in The Exorcist was
yeah.
possessed by whatever and blah blah blah. It's like
Yeah. I
yeah.
mean, that's much more convincing than your first argument of they're all dead now because it was a film from the 70s. But this,
Yeah.
that is actually crazy. I wonder if there was like anything that happened on the newer Omens that meant like maybe you shouldn't create another remake. But there's been so many at this point that I feel like they're not going to be too worried about it.
Yeah, yeah. It's fascinating because like the guy who directed this, Richard Donner, is like one of my favorite directors.
What other
And
stuff has he done?
oh gosh, he went on to direct the first Superman film I think it might have been off the back of this actually.
Wow.
And he also did Richard Donner also did the Lethal Weapon quadrilogy.
Yes, he
He
went into kind of more
did
action stuff after this.
yeah, he did The Goonies.
Oh, great film.
And yeah, a couple others, but yeah, he went on to have a very kind of prolific career. Like he was,
Wow.
yeah. Richard Donner was like a name man. Like he was like if you
Yeah.
saw his name attached to a movie back in the day, like it was
And it's
definitely
fair enough.
something.
Like I think the directing in this is really, really good. It's a very watchable, enjoyable film generally. And I think that people who don't even like horror would enjoy the film because I guess like we were saying, it's not overly scary. It's just it feels like a classic.
Mm,
It's sometimes hard to be like, oh, is this a film that everybody would enjoy in some way? But I feel like this is one that you would say is a classic. Like it doesn't have any bad acting in it. Yes, the script kind of falls down a little bit when it could have gone in different directions, but it is a very enjoyable film, especially for the 70s. Like that, I think that's a pretty big feat to be like, that's something that still holds up today.
yeah. And the fact that so you didn't live through well, neither of us lived through that era when this film was made, but I think both of us are like I think I'm like a generation or two removed from this film, but you're a couple of generations removed from this film, and if you still enjoyed it, it's
Yeah.
yeah, it does speak volumes about how well this has held up. So